All right. So, fam, we are here today to have a conversation about sex trafficking. Sex trafficking is something very prevalent and an issue specifically within Dallas, and a lot of it stems from immigration. So I have these same experts on. We'll come on and introduce ourselves and then get into this enlightening, juicy conversation on the heels of that Netflix movie, Cuties. Many people took offense to that movie, but it did tell a reality. So I have on board our experts from last time. My name is Dr. Pamela Grayson. I will let my experts introduce themselves. I'll tell you what they do and a little bit about their experience with the sex trafficking industry. Go ahead. Ms. Nadi.
Attorney, would you like to introduce yourself first? I have to fix my...
Sure. Okay. My name is John Ting. I practice immigration law in Dallas and Houston, Texas, and a good amount of our clients are actually those who are victims and survivors of abuse and trafficking.
All right.
My name is Natalia Montoya. I work with a lot of different foundations. I am a Brown Beret, and I work primarily with people of color in human trafficking, and I also work with food distribution.
All right, so now we have one more coming, or possibly two more, and we will add them once they get here. So, sex trafficking. What I like to do first is set the foundation. Define sex trafficking. What is it? Does it just mean putting people into prostitution? We swipe little girls, and does sex trafficking include men and boys?
It can, yes.
Okay. So what exactly, what I want to say is, can you tell me how sex trafficking works from beginning to end? Somebody is kidnapped and then...
Well, sex trafficking happens in a lot of different ways. One way is the child or person, excuse me, it can happen to anybody at any age. Usually, if the child grows up in an environment that is highly sexual, they are more prone to accept trafficking as a norm, per se. A lot of grown men and women, that have drug and alcohol problems, they allow themselves to be trafficked, or they get into that lifestyle. We see a lot of cases where young adults actually live at home still, and they've been influenced by other people to sell their bodies for drugs, for money. For some people, it's cultural. So if, let's say, somebody, has family tree where, someone in their family was doing that for income, a person in that family may do that to a younger family member, and it may be seen as something that's okay. So the person may not even realize that what's happening to them is wrong. So basically, there has to be an exchange of goods or money, usually drugs, something that the person wants or needs, and money. I think Attorney Ting could probably give a better explanation than I can legally.
Well, also, most of my clients who apply for what we call T visa for trafficking, they're people who have migrated from outside the United States. But I can understand what Nati is saying about others, survivors who have been part of that norm. That's all they know, unfortunately, and they don't know that's wrong. But for people that in some similar way, some migrants, uh, they they are coerced into this because it's by people they trust. It's a family member. So, and even if we had a client before, they said that the family member, I don't know, remember his aunt or cousin said, "Hey, tell whoever you approach at the border, custom border protection officer, that you're a U.S. citizen," even though this person clearly knows that he or she is not a U.S. citizen. So it's just, I think the similarity between Nati and I people were talking about, that there's some form of trust that these victims have, unfortunately, of their perpetrators.
Mm. And again, I'm going off what I see on TV. I remember there was an episode of Law and Order SVU where people would come from other countries and basically have to work off the cost of their trip in order to stay here. And that would put people into sex trafficking because they were working off their debt to stay because they came from another country.
Correct.
Is that something that happens for real?
It is, unfortunately, and that's even the case for people who are not trafficked. I suppose it's just, for example, because I had to pay off the coyote, essentially a person who helps them bring the migrant over to the United States, and oftentimes I would say, I can't say percentages, but a majority of the time, people who are trafficked don't know that they're going to be trafficked by the time they get into the United States. All they know is that maybe their parent or someone else helped them cross the border, but then later on, whoever's doing the smuggling portion of it sends them off to do into prostitution.
So they come over here not knowing that's what's going to happen?
Correct.
Correct.
Oh my.
Mm-hmm. The cases that you see where people are kidnapped and forced into that lifestyle, that seems to be what people assume happens with human trafficking. That's actually more rare in what I have seen. That does happen. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. That happens a lot, but it's not as frequent as people would think.
Mm. Okay. So in looking at, let me ask you this. Is this stemming from the immigration camps in El Paso and places like that, where they have my Latinx sisters and brothers in cages? Are they being put into sex trafficking?
Yes, they are. They are. What's happening with a lot of the information that's coming out, that people are coming forward and finally talking about. So for a long time, like I've known since December, that this has been happening from firsthand accounts, but now it's finally coming out on the media. Not as much as I would hope it would, but a lot of the women and children are being forced to perform sexual acts, or they're just being raped. And so they're being told, well, if you do this for us now, we'll make sure that you get taken care of, or you can get out sooner. And then with a lot of these children that are being bused across the border, once they get across the border, the United States washes their hands of what happens to them. And a lot of them end up victims of sex trafficking, because not all of them are from Mexico. And if they are from Mexico, they left for a reason. It's not like they have money to go back home. The ones that are released into custody here, unfortunately, the children, a lot of them are put into situations where they are forced into labor or into prostitution to, quote, pay off what that person has done for them, which happens a lot in cases of, we see that in CPS, we see that a lot with children who are put into foster care. Now, these children aren't necessarily in foster care. So that's part of the problem, is that we really don't know where these children are going to. And so the stories that we're hearing are the worst case scenarios, because we're not hearing anything else.
Oh my. So,
And in general, I can't, if I can add to that, sorry, on what Nati said, I don't have personal knowledge. I don't have clients that mention specifically what you, like, for example, you said in El Paso, but in general, it has been reported that there are complaints of sexual abuse really throughout the country in detention centers. And so just there is, unfortunately, as I mentioned last week in the show, that any kind of report and enforcement of it, or a discipline, I mean, of that, it's very slow, unfortunately, when it comes with federal government. And especially, and what I didn't mention last show is that they try to separate layers. There are a separation of liability layers. There's that recent report this past Monday by a nurse in a detention center in Georgia of the
hysterectomy.
The forced hysterectomies. That's right. And so, I remember she was working there for 2 years. So I can't imagine. I'm not in her shoes, right? Or none of us are. But it took her, I'm assuming, 2 years to drum up the courage to file a complaint, because by the sound of the report, that's been going on for so long. It wasn't just a one-time incident. And anyway, what I'm trying to say is that because there's this layer, for example, of the private prisons, a lot of private prisons are mostly for-profit. I mean, publicly traded companies, and also just privately owned as well, not on the stock market. But it's very unfortunate that this is going on, and I think that in this Georgia story, that this doctor is a subcontractor of ICE. That's from what I can tell from the facts.
And one thing that I would like to add to that, I know this comes off as very conspiracy theory, so to that I do apologize. But so a lot of these women are having their partial hysterectomies or full hysterectomies, and suddenly we have all these advances in sciences on uterine transplants. These for-profit prisons, they're for-profit, so what are they profiting from exactly? What is it that they're profiting from? Just the number of bodies?
Yep. They get so much money per body per day.
Mm-hmm. No, I would not call that conspiracy. Those are facts.
That's a fact. But what was the purpose of the removing of the hysterectomy? Was it a racist thing, so the Latinx women could no longer have kids?
Well, this part could go into a conspiracy, but I have my own thoughts. But the report said that some people were having menstrual cycles, or some people, I think, one person had to remove a cyst, and then that's not what happened. So, and unfortunately, this reminds me of I think it was a Michigan.
Is that he oftentimes would remove the wrong ovary if the person had a cyst. And this is somebody who was sued by the government because he was overcharging for what he was doing.
Something fraud, Medicare, Medicaid fraud. And he was some hospitals. He was the person in charge at one particular hospital. I remember that. But I can't help but think that his motives were racially driven, because they like to say Black people and Latinx people, we have all these kids and blah 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 blah. I really think that played a part into what he did. Now, in looking at the immigration camps in, like, say, El Paso or down that way, Laredo, is that coming back to Dallas? Because Dallas has a problem. Is any of that what's going on down there? Is that making its way back to Dallas, or is Dallas a self-contained mess?
Well,
what do you think?
here's okay. So this is what I've seen, and so I've worked and I've spoken with a couple of search and rescue people that that's all they do is they look for runaways and they look for women and children that are in this scenario. Between New Orleans, Houston, Austin, and Dallas, these people are being moved around. So a lot of them are from the Latin communities, the Asian communities, and the Black communities. And they move them around, so it's difficult for the police and Homeland Security and the FBI to build cases. You know, there used to be this thought that the only people who were involved in human trafficking would be like pimps in the ghetto, right? But this is a multi-million-dollar industry. So there's a lot of big players involved who know the right people to get, you know, people across state lines, to put them in certain housing, always going to be found on the streets in South Dallas. You're going to find them in places in McKinney, you know, in more affluent neighborhoods. Now, that's not to say you're not going to find it in, you know, predominantly Asian neighborhoods, you know, poor white neighborhoods. You're also going to find it there. But these people that are making a lot of money off of this, they know exactly what they're doing. They know all the right people in the right places. And yeah, they are taking some people from the border.
Attorney Tang, did you have anything to add?
Well, that's what raises a concern about people who the detainees that were put in the motel, because the government is supposed to know where these people are detained, and if they're taken to an offsite location, you know, because let's say they run out of beds, the government should know. And it seemed like Congress didn't know about it until reports were revealed about it. And the concern about that is what Nati was saying, that people can be maybe taken to the motel and then, or supposed to be taken to the motel under government control and then taken somewhere else, just off the radar. And that's the other concern about the last 2 or 3 years, that people were not reported when they crossed the border. And so mostly the children. So this is a huge concern for the American people. But it just doesn't seem that politicians are taking a serious concern.
I would agree. They don't take a serious concern when it's American people in jeopardy.
Yeah, and I'm speaking from me observing, not just the media, right, but also watching the subcommittee hearings. I mean, unfortunately, the conservatives, all they talk about is trying to make sure they're not having any kind of liability. They're not focusing on what the issue is, and that's helping people, right?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. And you see people like, is it Prince Andrew, who was friends with Epstein and Ghislaine, and you know, he says he's working with the FBI, but he's hiding at Buckingham Palace, and he's a known pedophile, you know, and did things with girls that were citizens of the United States. So you know, we've got some high rollers here who are making a lot of money. And are acting on their perversions on our youth. So, you know, this is a conversation that a lot of people are having right now, but this is something that's been going on for a very long time.
Let's talk about Dallas, because Dallas has a huge problem with sex trafficking. And I'm just shocked. I didn't, to me, this did not come out until the last couple of years, when I saw it was a spa, an Asian spa, and apparently they were giving people happy endings and so forth. How long has this been going on? And how did it get here?
Well, my belief has been going on for a very long time. I don't think this is new at all, unfortunately. Um, People just turn a blind eye if there's a business neighbor business and they just don't say anything. That's my understanding.
That's been my understanding too. In Dallas specifically, so we talked the last episode about the bus tours that people actually have that show you places where people have been known to be sex trafficked. Um, so there was one specific place that Yolanda Blue Horse told me about that was in proximity to Texas Instruments, and you had to have a very specific pass to get into it. There are some locations that are literally in downtown Dallas. Um, and, a lot of these people that are being trafficked, like they're actually children. So there is no accountability, uh, like where are these children coming from specifically? Like nobody can really tell you that. A lot of children go missing in the foster system. Where are they going missing to? And then we have all of these children that are being sent to the United States, like Miss Mendoza had mentioned last episode, like their families send them here hoping that they can make it with their family members, or they can be united with someone they know. And they get here, and people in our own communities, they put them in these places where they get pimped out. And so this has been happening in Texas and specifically in Dallas. Um, gosh, I want to say since the 60s or 70s, like probably even before then. It's been happening a very long time. It's just that, there are more organizations that are doing their research into, well, okay, like what cities is it happening more often? What parts of those cities, etc.
Wow. So so okay, I'm a novice. Do I know when I'm walking past a brothel? Can I see, or is there what would tip me off? Or I just simply would not know.
I don't think.
Usually,
Yeah,
oh, go ahead, attorney.
I was gonna say. I mean, I don't think I would know. Just walking by, I think it's probably, unless you're looking specifically in some kind of newspaper ad or online for these brothels, we just wouldn't know. I mean, unfortunately, I'm in Houston, Texas, and there's just a conspiracy. But there's so many spas, and I'm thinking, unfortunately, in my mind, I'm thinking, which one of these is a brothel? And we just can't tell from the outside view from the parking lot.
So if I go into a brothel, not knowing, thinking it's a spa, will they service me? Would they
Probably. I
give
mean,
me a
I know
massage
some.
and put rocks on me and stuff, or tell me we really, we're booked or something like that? Are they operating as spas or are they not?
I believe they are. They have a front as a regular spa business. Let's say like a regular massage parlor. But I'm sure they have some kind of code name if they're looking for some special services
Mm-hmm.
or code word.
Do they service same sex needs?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes, and again, like I said earlier, some people come from situations where they think that's totally normal, and they have no problem doing it because it's been happening to them for so long, or it's so prevalent in their community that they think that's okay. And you often find that a lot of the same-sex prostitution that's happening, unfortunately, people will pay more to have unprotected sex. And a lot of times you cannot tell if somebody is being forced into this type of work because they look, if whoever's handling them is doing it properly, they look healthy, they look fine. You would not know that that's somebody who actually needs your help.
Mm, mm, mm. So the adults go to brothels. Where are the children going?
Attorney, maybe you should answer that, because my answer is not. My answer is filthy.
Well, you probably know better than I do.
Oh
Where
Lord,
are they trafficking kids, y'all?
they are.
Yeah.
So recently, Homeland Security arrested two grown men. One was African American, one was Latino, and they replied to an ad. It didn't specifically say sex or whatever, but there was a very specific way that they were saying these things, to have sex with a 13-year-old girl. And when Homeland Security went in, she had nothing on but a hoodie. So the way that they're doing this with the children is, you'll see vans that they look like church vans. They look like they're going to a party. They look like gosh, what are the little party vans that they have for kids where you can go and play video games? Like, it looks very innocuous,
Yeah.
if you know what I'm saying. Or it looks like it's a family trip. Like, you would never know. And these poor kids are
Unsuspecting, yeah.
usually doped up, or they're too afraid to run, or they tell them, well, if you leave, we're going to kill, like so many of these kids if you leave. So a lot of these children are held in hotels. So another case, there was a family that was staying at a hotel. They saw somebody knock on the door. They saw a girl open the door. She was maybe 11 years old, but she was dressed very scantily, had a lot of makeup on. And father thought, well, who would let their kid dress like that, you know?
Mm.
And then the family, they left, they came back, and they saw another man knocking on the door, and it was an all-night thing. So they called the front desk, and the front desk didn't send anybody up there. So finally the guy called the police. So, that basically told me, like, a lot of these front desk people, or a lot of these hotels, they know exactly what's going on. They're making their money. And so a lot of and I'm not going to say specific names, because I take this very seriously. A lot of the women that I've spoken to who have survived this, they tell me point blank, they're not seen as people, especially if they're illegal. They're seen as a way to make money. And for a lot of them, the only way to make their situation any better is to basically start pimping people out themselves, to become madams. You know what I'm saying? And they just keep perpetuating the cycle. So the cycle just, for them, they get treated like, well, we're not even human beings. Like, this is all we're good for. So they grow up and they keep doing the same thing, and it just keeps going and going and going. And for a lot of them, they meet state representatives, they meet lawyers, they meet judges. And this is how these women get out of their situation. They become madams, or they become somebody's mistress. And for them, that's the only way out, because again, they're undocumented. And so with these children, the way that they get transported, you would never know. It looks like just a family. Like, a lot of times RVs are used. A lot of these big rig trucks that you see, the cargo in the back, a lot of times it's children, and so that sounds very much like a QAnon conspiracy, but that's a fact. They even had one a couple years ago, that the truck broke down at a Walmart parking lot. Do y'all remember that?
San
Filled with
Antonio,
people.
I think.
And it was full of kids.
Not just kids. They were also adults.
So that was a coyote. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, and the driver just played it off like he didn't know what or who was in there.
Yeah, I remember that, because wasn't the driver black?
I'm not sure, but I know those people. They were severely dehydrated, so they finally jumped out and asked for help.
Mm-hmm.
And what's
I'm
sad is they
pretty
ended
sure
up getting
that-
deported. So it's like,
What'd you say?
you know,
Did they
what's
get
sad
deported?
they did.
Wow.
Yeah.
So explain to me this visa, the sex trafficking visa. How does that work?
So first, Dr. Grayson, is that these victims, they have to, like what Nati was saying, that some people think this is all they're good for. This is what they do day to day, and it's going to be really difficult. So for someone to eventually report this to authorities, but when they eventually do, then this kind of case would go through the Homeland Security investigations, which is through the Department of Homeland Security.
Okay.
And then eventually they usually get referred to a nonprofit agency to see if they can help them. And it's for free because nonprofits usually run by grants. And then they apply for a visa, trafficking visa, but they still have to cooperate with the authorities, of course, because they want to put away, prosecute whoever the trafficker is. And so after they get this visa, which could take, I'm looking at the chart here from last year's report, that first application, this is not for a green card. This is only for a visa, which is valid for 4 years, but it takes about almost 2 years for it to process. And that's a very long time because, especially as someone trying to find stable employment, turn next page in their life, they also need to get that work permit. But I also want to share not in addition to the long processing time, that there's only 5,000 of these T visas available every fiscal year. Last show, we were talking about the U visa, and that only has 10,000. But T visa even has half the amount. And everyone the government knows trafficking is a problem. There's a lot of nonprofits. There's even been information in the news about former CIA or former government officials or former military that do special operations on trafficking, that they create their own nonprofit to help in this issue. And so it's just sad to see that there's still only 5,000. So that's part of the reason why there's a longer delay on processing these cases.
What does processing a visa take? Because to me, I'm thinking you sign the paperwork, we run a background check, confirm where they live and that they have a job. What takes 2 years?
You raise a very good question, and that this is typical in a way that there's always some kind of processing time for every type of immigration benefit application. And it's just, in my mind, my personal opinion, this is the way, among other immigration attorneys, this is the way the government controls the flow of immigrants from being able to obtain legal status. And it doesn't take long at all. If I were to be in a position of an immigration officer, I receive the case. If I look at it from the front to the end, it really should only take a couple hours.
Yeah.
And that's actually what it says in the government federal regulations, that certain applications take, let's say, 2 or 3 hours. But you're right. Yes, background check, but that doesn't take long either.
So this is another reason why people are afraid to run away from their handlers, because number one, they know that if they report it to the police, they're probably not going to get any help. They're just going to be sent right back to the detention centers, or be deported, and they're going to be in a worse situation than they were, when they tried to leave.
Wow.
Right. Most people don't know what legal protections are there available for them. So if they don't talk to someone about it, then how are they going to feel? A person going to feel comfortable to report their handler?
And then my concern is that you still have people that won't tell them the truth, that will look to take advantage of them too. Because you mentioned how what is it? The notorios. It's a notary in English. but they would tell people they could help them and charge them a lot of money, and in reality cannot. Um, wow.
Right.
So if I am trafficked and I decide to tell, it would take me 2 years to get this visa. If I'm a minor, where am I for 2 years? In foster care? On the street? In a cage? Where they got me?
It may depend if they get help initially legally through a nonprofit. And the nonprofits that I help out with, they do have housing services through grants, but I mean, grants in general, as you may recall from President Trump when he first got into office in 2016, he reduced the number of grants, the money available.
Mm-hmm.
So, and specifically for trafficking.
Mm-hmm.
Which is interesting because I know a lot of conservatives who say, "Oh, liberals are worried about the mask, but there's this new story about trafficking. Why aren't we worried about that?" But in reality, the politicians I've seen on subcommittee hearings, they haven't mentioned anything about trafficking.
And I think to me that is racially and socioeconomically driven. They think it doesn't happen to our kids, so it's not a big issue. How often does it happen to children from more affluent neighborhoods?
It does happen, but not as often. It does happen. It's not as common. And those children, they have more security to report it. They have more incentive to report it. You know, it's very biased because they do have more protection.
So when someone is trafficked, their bodies are just, I'm assuming, just all but destroyed.
Mm-hmm.
Their mentality, their psyche, their emotions, spirituality, destroyed. Can they come back from that and be whole?
That is, so I know of a couple women. One was, well, okay, so one story that I knew, I knew a woman in North Carolina who walked with her children from Honduras to Mexico.
Did we lose Nadi? I can't. Can you hear? We can't hear you, Nadi. Your sound went out. Oh, wait a minute. Okay. She has, I guess, kind of. Nadi?
Oh, there she is.
Is that better?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay, so we're talking about, people who have been chained to beds, who have been doped up, who have been, malnourished, who have been beaten, who have been emotionally abused. So yes, they can come back from it, but it takes a lot of work. And so, they are at the mercy of nonprofits, essentially. They are at the mercy of, people willing to work with them, with counseling services for free. And we all know that that's really hard to come by. For every organization that's out there to help, there are thousands of people who need help. So they can only help so many.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times these people turn to drugs, they have PTSD, they have mental health issues. So they end up going in the prison system, essentially. So do they ever come back from it? I mean, that's a really hard question to answer.
Wow. with society stereotyping the way it does, do you think it is harder for boys or men to come back from this?
I do. I do.
Absolutely. Unfortunately.
I do.
Who do you think is more willing to get away from their handler, women or men, girls or boys? Who is more likely to leave a handler?
That's basically an individual scenario.
Right.
I know I served with a soldier who was a very good looking young boy, and so his brother would actually sell him to different men, and he has what is now dissociative identity disorder, what we used to call multiple personality disorder. And he left the Army with an honorable discharge. He ended up becoming an EMT, but in his 40s, all of that abuse kicked in, and so today I don't speak with him anymore because he has now become the abuser. So for him, he tried to get away, but people would make fun of him. Like even the police would be like, "Oh, well, that's damaged goods right there. We can't do anything for him." So I don't know that there is a higher percentage of males or females. I do know socially there are more programs for women and for young girls than there are for men and boys.
Because I imagine men are ashamed to talk about that.
Hmm. And also the court system, the way they view women and young girls is they see us as, well, they're going to lose their virginity eventually someday. But with men and young boys, they see it as more of a travesty. So the law actually does work more in their favor, but it's just a matter of somebody being willing to come forward. Because again, they're still afraid of their handler or what that handler may do to them once they come forward or to anybody that they know or care about.
Do
I
you?
had a situation where I did represent a male victim, and it took several meetings with him personally, one on one, to really investigate the story, get him to share it, and eventually, when we built that trust, he was able to share it. But yeah, I can't imagine being in their position to, number one, trust someone, and then just knowing the social dynamics. That I think part of it was the machismo, like being like the male figure and not wanting to appear weak, and that's very common in most, and really a lot of cultures.
How many brothels do you think are in Dallas?
That's hard to say, but I'm looking at the PolarisProject.org. It's one of the larger organizations that help human trafficking victims, but they have an image of the map here. It's like a heat map.
Mm-hmm.
In Dallas and Houston, along with like the East Coast, New York, it's hot spots, and LA. It's a huge red dot. Or not even a dot, it's blurred, so it's a large area. It's like the Metroplex, essentially.
If I had to guess, I mean, this is just a rough guess because again, I mean, this information doesn't get reported. I would say it's in the high hundreds just for Dallas County, not just Dallas the city, but Dallas County. And then the surrounding areas, you have more as well. And Houston is they have a higher percentage of people in human and sex trafficking. So I can't speculate to that though.
Do you all know of any success stories of anyone that went through this and came out on the other end and lived a good life?
Fortunately, so far, seems like a high number of my clients are doing what they can in society per se with a job and have their own family. But, I'm not with them day to day, so I don't know what type of not normal, but daily struggles they're facing. But now that you're raising this is honestly a good reason for me to just check in on them every once in a while to just see how they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Because we all know of different social service agencies or agencies that have social services, but, just point them in the right direction.
Because I know we are looking for that. We're setting that up for the hurricane evacuees here in Dallas. This is a trauma that they have sustained. And they are going to need help after this, like you said, especially if it was someone they trusted that got them into this.
Mm-hmm.
So the next time they trust somebody, they'll think this is normal. And then based on the brutalness of what happened to them, are their bodies damaged forever, or do they heal and they can continue and procreate?
I am working with a woman for an event on the 3rd who was, well, actually, 2 women. They were victims of this abuse as children and as young adults. They did get away. They found solace through their individual faiths, and now they do they raise awareness. They teach young girls, things to look out for.
Mm-hmm.
They speak in their communities. They teach girls little things like, don't sit on a man's lap, because, even if that's your uncle, if you get used to doing that with your family, then, someone that you trust is going to, they may approach you in that manner, and then it'll start from there. So they teach the little things that was done to them little by little, and, and then they're very blunt about how the abuse started, that it was with people that they trusted. And then the lady I brought up from Honduras, so now she lives in North Carolina. She is finally, she finally has her green card. She has a maid service. And, she brought her 3 children with her. They were very young, and she has since remarried. So yes, there is room to heal. But again, a lot of counseling. And so, I think talking about this, but I endured some sexual trauma, and so just from my experience, counseling is what helped me mentally, but my body will sometimes remember things, and for no reason I get this muscle memory, and I'm like, where did that come from? It's totally normal, happy day, and then I feel it. So you have to learn techniques to say to yourself, you know what, this is what your body is feeling. Allow yourself to feel it and move through it as gracefully as you can. And if you need to go home, or if you need to sit down, take a deep breath. But like, there are a lot of techniques that people who have survived these types of traumas, they can learn. It's just a matter of, number one, admitting that you need help, which is really hard for a lot of people to do, because they feel like, well, I escaped, so I'm stronger than that now. You have to admit you need help. You have to be willing to do those things that people have suggested. And if you have dependency issues, then you need to get help with that too. And it's a lifelong process. It's not like you're cured overnight. It's a day-to-day thing. Like they say in 12-step programs, one day at a time. That's what survivors have to do. It's one day at a time.
So the 2 ladies that that speak, are they married? Did they move forward?
One of them is married and has 2 children. And then the other one is not. She's decided not to have children. And that's a personal choice. I'm never going to tell a survivor, what religion they should follow. I'm never going to tell them to do certain things. As long as they're doing themselves, that's That's their choice. And men too. Men too.
Do you think it was her experience that made her decide not to have children?
Yes. That's what she has told me.
Okay.
Yes.
What do you all think about this firstborn challenge where they're putting the pictures of their firstborns out there, and the first day of school pics, and we're checking in at the actual school? What are your thoughts on that?
For me, I'm against putting children photos on the internet because they could be downloaded and used for something else, but also because then people know where your children go to school. Because some people like to put the actual location. I'm not tech savvy to know if you can download a photo and then you can find a geo tracking. It's just, I don't think it's a good idea at all.
If they put it like on Facebook and they put the location there, it tells you where it is.
Mm-hmm.
It'll show you a map if you want it to.
Yeah.
If you can download other people's pictures, and then you don't even have to download. If it's on a phone, all you gotta do is screenshot.
Yeah, you can actually find the IP address. Like if it's on social media, you can find the IP address to where that photo was downloaded. So, I mean, I personally do it, and I did do it only because, and this is going to sound silly, y'all. My son's dad, he's not in the picture physically, but I knew he was watching him online grow up. And that's the only reason why I did it. And because I know, I know if anything happened to my son, I have the resources to find him. I mean, that's the only reason why I did it. But other than that, I am very much against it because, like you said, you don't know who's looking at your kids. You don't know, what kind of pervert, may find them attractive. But yes.
Now, for me, I do put pics of Blade out there, but I never put them public because I know I have some family that does want to see my child.
Yeah.
But I don't leave them public. People know not to forward them because that will make you have it out with me. If I'm going to tag our location, I will tag it, but we aren't there. By the time you see it, we're gone.
Mm-hmm.
And that's about it. But somebody had brought up that firstborn challenge. But then again, I'm like, well, some of these people are adults. Well, but some aren't. They're saying that those types of challenges are really to enable sex traffickers. Do you guys think that?
I think it is a way for someone to follow that child, but I don't think it's necessarily by sex trafficking. So I think a lot of times people have good intentions, but perverts are perverts. They'll find a way. I mean, they look at catalogs and find these children attractive. I mean, they look at movies and find children attractive. In the 70s, Playboy had a whole thing with Brooke Shields in the bathtub, and nobody had a problem with it.
And she was like 10 or something, wasn't she?
Yeah. So, our culture, we for the longest time, we were always told like, oh, this doesn't really happen, or it doesn't happen often, or it only happens in those communities, with those people. But it's been happening for a while. It's just now we're having the conversation, and we're learning more of like what we can do to protect our children and our families.
And so I'm looking at, you had mentioned 2 articles. The one happened 4 days ago.
Yes.
And I see the one about the bus tour that reveals hidden stories behind human trafficking. Oh my gosh. This one it's October, about a year old, but it's still relevant. And apparently at that time, in Dallas, 400 teens were sold for sex every day.
Yes, and that number is still correct even during COVID-19. That number is still very much correct.
Yeah.
And so now people aren't using money; they're exchanging drugs, sometimes even food, if you can imagine that, for sex. And these poor victims, they're not seeing much of any of that. They're only being kept alive so their bodies can be handled. That's about it.
Yeah, it's even more a difficult time for these victims to report or just
Mhm.
share their story to a neighbor or someone because of the pandemic and all the different orders to stay at home or just taking caution in general. Um, I know that, for example, at was it Kroger or somewhere on the bottom, there's like a decal sticker. Will say like, okay, call this hotline if you're a victim of trafficking. So those little signage can probably help, but if people are not able to get out and about in that sense in the public, then it's going to unfortunately continue.
If they
Yeah,
can't get out and about to tell, how are folks getting out and about to still buy them? Shouldn't that slow down?
no. Well, I mean, think of it this way. Think of it as like an addiction. Okay, so like even to right now, people who are addicted to drugs, they're still feeding their habit. So with pedophilia, it's a disgusting mental problem, but they're going to feed that any way that they can. It's disgusting, but they're going to do it.
Have the two of you seen Cuties?
Ugh. I saw half of it, and then I had to take a shower because I don't even feel comfortable watching movies where I know that they're adults acting as teenagers. Like I feel like I'm watching kiddie porn. So like I can't comment on that movie. I can't.
Did
I
you
have,
see it? Uh-huh.
I did not
Okay.
see it.
But did you not see the plot and a level of reality in the movie? Just as disgusting as it was, they were telling the truth.
Okay. They were telling the truth, Dr. Grayson, but they really need to have a 3.5 minute long sexual dance and a girl humping the ground? And they could have told the truth without having to show. There's that one scene where the girl takes her leg and does it all the way up here and she's wearing short shorts. I was like, that's a little bit extreme. Like, I understand why the movie was made, but it didn't need to go that far to make its point. And that's all I'm going to say about it.
Okay. Sometimes they need to make the point because some people don't get it. And I do understand why they went that far because some people don't get it. Just like they're saying boys will be boys, they're just saying there's some fast girls and they're dismissive. And some people need that eye opener. Kind of like with, racism. They don't
Mm-hmm.
believe it. But now that you've seen George Floyd, everybody's for Black Lives That Matter. We've been telling you there's an issue. They had to see something vivid in order to get a clue.
Mhm.
So I'm
Well,
thinking that you did that so those that need that vividness will get a clue.
I think Attorney Ting alluded to the fact, the way the conservatives feel about this situation. I see these women, with signs like "Save the children, save the children." I'm like, where have you been for the past 15 years? You just jumped on the bandwagon because you and your paranoid, friends, you listen to the QAnon, and you know what? Like, thank you for making the story more relevant to these people who are unaware of it, but they're yelling to the wrong people. Like they're making it about something that it isn't, and they're taking away from what's really happening. And then I see these things where Trump is saving the children. I'm sorry, y'all, but Trump has a lot of NDAs with girls who at the time were underage. So I'm just a little taken aback. I have to like mind my P's and Q's. So
I have given up on anything he does making sense. Yeah, we given up on that. Last question. As a parent of a child that we'll say is a minor, I'll say maybe 10 and below. What pointers do you give me to prevent my child from being snatched by sex traffickers, or to be able to recognize what's going on? How do I protect myself on the internet when, to recognize what's going on there if it is a questionable request?
Well, personally, I have a toddler, a girl toddler, and we want to teach her. I think first of all, it's going to be hard to keep social media away from in general, but we're going to try our best as long as possible, or at least the phone, the device, right? But just the general concept. Nati was talking about, not letting children sit in uncle's lap, for example. That's a great point. We may be extreme in this, but that you only receive gift from us, the parents. There's really no reason to get a gift from someone else. It's nice, I get it, but it's just more broadly thinking that no one needs to be giving you this, because if you get enough allowance, you can buy it yourself. So just not being dependent on the materialism, right? Material goods. That's really the key point.
For me, being the mother of a boy, I started at a very young age, at an age appropriate level of understanding, teaching him about his body, teaching him the specific names of different parts of his body, and teaching him, it's not okay for anybody to look at you a certain way for a certain amount of time. You need to tell me if people are looking at you for too long. To have manners, but when people, it's one thing for someone to say, hey, you did a good job. But if somebody comes up to you and smacks you on the butt and says, hey, you did really good and whatever, for him to say, I don't like it when you touch me like that. Please don't do it again. And if they do it again, you say something. I was very adamant with him. The only time anybody can touch you in a certain area is if I'm present, or if you have an extreme accident at school and the nurse is present and somebody else is present. So, there was one specific incident where a bully, while my son was urinating, said something to him, and my son, he screamed really loud. He called the kid a liar, and I got a phone call because my son did very specifically what we talked about. And so we would even enact scenarios like, okay, I'm the stranger and I'm pulling you into the car. What do you do? Or somebody says, hey, your mom is really hurt. You got to come with us. Like, you don't know that person. They don't know me. No, you don't do that. And with his computer or any device, I always looked at everything that he was looking at, and we talked about all of it. So that's the advice I give.
And I think that's excellent advice, because, and one thing I do like is, yes, especially with my oldest son, I would check the computer history. What are you looking at? Explain this to me. So I think that is great. I think we've had a great conversation, eye-opening about what's going on in Dallas, what's stemming from the immigration camps down south, and good ways to protect our children. So I want to thank you. Thank you for this one. And we are good. So
I just want to say one thing. We hear this a lot, but if you see something, say something. And if you see somebody who's giving you that look like, hey, I need help, walk up to them and say, can I help you? Because, they may need your help. And sometimes it scares their handler enough to leave, like to run. They're not used to people being proactive. So if you see it, walk up to them. Do you need help?
And exactly. And I would even go as far as to report it to the police. Look, this child looked at me. Is something not right? Especially as mothers, as parents, we know you get gut instinct. And then I would definitely call it in. That way, if you're fearful for your safety, you can do it anonymously and go ahead and call it, take pictures, say this is not looking right. And then we've got a license plate. They can follow that vehicle. Unless the plates are stolen.
Yes. And especially, I know right now it's not as prevalent, movie theaters. I had a situation where there was an older white man with a young Asian boy, and this little boy looked terrified. I literally walked right up to the man. I saw what he was doing. I called the police, and I blocked his way, and they were there within 6 minutes, and it worked out for the best for this young boy. So yes, always look out movie views.
Wow. So he had the little Asian boy was his.
Yes. Yes.
And I don't get that. I don't, especially little boys, because I've raised 2 of them and they stink. Why would you want that? It's beyond me. My kids stink. All right. So you all have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much for taking the time to us. And this will be available on YouTube video so that we can view it later. And you can get this good advice and good information. Thank you both.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye. We'll see you next time.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.